It's a vast pottery army which is slowly being unearthed from the tomb where it's lain for more than 2,000 years.
A single clay figure has stepped out of the dust and rearranged an empire's story.
So these warriors are all life-sized, like real soldiers. Also, they have different facial features.
This newly unearthed commander does not match any catalogued type. His armor carries unfamiliar cues. His posture reads like a frozen order, and his placement beside elite chariots suggests a live chain of command encoded in clay. If one buried officer can upend decades of assumptions in a single excavation season, what else lies sealed beneath Shaanxi? Messages about rank, power, and afterlife strategy that were meant to outwait us. The army that would not stay silent. For half a century, the Terracotta army has been the quiet spectacle that keeps speaking. The story begins with farmers digging a well east of modern Xi'an and striking something that sounded wrong under the blade. Curiosity became astonishment when archaeologists pulled the first faces from the earth and realized they were looking at an army without a heartbeat. Life-size soldiers stood row after row, the infantry in dense blocks, the archers in loose arcs, the charioteers flanked by horses whose ears were tilted just so. It was lifelike in the small gestures and severe in the grand design. The more the site was mapped, the more it resembled a field manual. You could read tactics from alignments, glean logistics from the density of crossbow triggers, and see the mind of a ruler in the way space was divided and controlled. What made it uncanny was not the number of figures, but the refusal of any two faces to repeat. Every brow line, every moustache, every trace of age or youth felt specific. The hands that modeled them were not mass-producing a symbol of power. They were recreating people. Even the boots carried crisp lace patterns, and the armor plates showed rivets and stitching. Scholars have argued for years over how much was molded from standard parts and how much was sculpted by hand, but every season of conservation revealed human decisions layered into every surface. This is why the site never fell silent. It was not a monument to an idea, it was a system cast in bodies. If formations already telegraphed strategy, what would a single unmistakable commander figure add that the ranks could never say alone? The commander emerges in Pit 2. Late in 2024, a cautious trench extension along the southern grid of Pit 2 opened across a patchwork of damaged torsos and shattered limbs. The team had seen fine work before, but this torso was different at first glance. The cheeks were cut with unusual crispness, the lips were firm, and the top knot was bound in a pattern that curators did not recognize from the standard officer types. Pigment clung to the edges of his armor seams more vividly than anything in the trench. Tiny lakes of red and dark green caught in protected pockets of clay that air had not yet bleached. When conservators moved to expose the midsection, they met a belt assembly that did not match the known typologies and a sculpted sash that crossed the left hip in a way that suggested a precedent we had never documented. Then the lower half came free. The stance was wide but not aggressive. One heel turned slightly to brace the body, and the right arm lifted just enough that the hand could not plausibly have held a spear or bow. It looked like the raised moment before a signal. Less than 2 meters away sat the wreck of a chariot with fittings that were unusually clean and balanced, and beyond it, a second chariot with finer bronze mounts than its neighbors. It did not feel like transport parked by chance. It felt like a node of coordination. The soil matrix around the figure carried more weapon fragments than an average patch, and the distribution skewed toward elite kit. Spears here were heavier at the socket, and the arrowheads were better finished than the bulk of the pit. What caught everyone was not a single detail, but the stack of them. The face that looked like a person, the sash that read like a rank mark, the posture that read like an order, and the neighborhood that read like a command point. If this is a commander, can armor, posture, and placement teach us a rank language that written sources only hint at? Armor and rank. Archaeologists have long read the army as a visual archive. Hairstyles signaled unit types. Belts and shoes marked status. Armor scales varied in density for mobility or protection. The new figure extends that grammar in a way that feels like discovering a missing chapter of a manual. The plates on his chest overlap more tightly than those on ordinary officers, suggesting an emphasis on guarding the sternum and spine, while the shoulder scales are deliberately smaller to allow rotational movement without catching. The collar rises a fraction higher and is beveled, which might be an aesthetic flourish, but on this figure, nothing feels accidental. The belt is constructed in layers rather than a single slab, and the knot sits off-center in a way that creates a visual anchor for the sash. On the lower body, the skirt plates are staggered in 3 tiers, instead of the 2 commonly seen on mid-ranking types, a detail that would slow a hurried sculptor but signal category at a glance. There are tooling differences as well. The polish along the edges is finer, the inner seams are cleaner, and the transitions between plates are more confident. Under magnification, you can see different hands on the same piece, which points to a workshop hierarchy where specific artisans handled elite commissions. Even the face participates in the code. The eyebrows are modeled with a sharper break at the temple, the cheeks are taut, and the eyes are slightly lowered, giving the impression of concentration rather than threat. It feels like a portrait of attention, and when you combine it with the raised right arm, you read the body as the act of giving orders rather than receiving them. Scholars have argued that bodies were standardized, and only the heads varied. This piece contests that. Here, the body is the argument. If rank is embedded in plate and stance, can the surrounding layout tell us where orders went and how fast they moved? Placement, chariots, and the flow of orders. Maps of Pit 2 show it as a tactical mesh where cavalry and archers interlock. The commander stands at a hinge between speed and ranged fire, which would be a natural place to coordinate a rippling attack. The 2 neighboring chariots carry fittings that are more refined than typical examples in the same zone. The axle caps are well balanced, the hubs are cleaner, and the fragments of flooring suggest a tighter assembly. Rather than battlefield taxis, these read like command platforms. Bronze finds in the area are not just more numerous, they are better finished. Bow components look suited to precision. Spearheads are weighted for thrust, not for throw. The concentration suggests a planning cell rather than a random scatter. There is also the geometry of lines of sight. From the commander's exact position, you can trace clear corridors down the files of archers and out across the intended lanes of cavalry movement. It is not hard to imagine a staff officer signaling a shift in distance or ordering a wheel that would move riders from the shoulder of the formation to the enemy's flank. If the army is a model of power, this corner of Pit 2 is a model of communication. You can almost see the ripple of command moving from a raised hand to the first riders who nudge their horses and then to the archers who adjust their aim to cover the gap. The idea that this is a functioning diagram rather than a grave good gains strength the longer you sit with the spatial logic. It does not feel like art placed for beauty. It feels like a machine that still describes work. If the pits show the moving parts of a working hierarchy, what does the silent core at the center of the site intend to say by remaining sealed? The unopened core and the choice of silence. At the heart of the complex, a grass-covered mound rises above the ranks like a quiet verdict. Ground surveys sketch inner walls, corridors, and rooms at a scale that dwarfs any single pit. The texts claim that Qin Shi Huang ordered palaces underground, a map of his realm drawn in precious stone, and artificial rivers of mercury to form the seas. For a long time, those lines were treated as literary excess. Soil readings around the mound tell a different story. Mercury levels are high in patterns that look like flows rather than spills, and that seems to echo the old accounts. The chamber remains closed for a reason. When the first warriors were exposed, pigments that had survived for 2 millennia vanished in minutes as oxygen and humidity did their work, and that single mistake has become the cautionary tale that governs every decision. Today's non-invasive scans give an outline but not the delicate truth of materials, and until conservation technology can stabilize a room before it exhales, the risk of opening the core remains too high. That is the official position, and it is hard to argue with the logic. Yet there is a second layer to the silence. The texts also warn of traps. Crossbows rigged to fire, mechanisms built into the doors, devices meant to kill intruders. Whether or not those survive, the psychological intention is clear. The Emperor wanted his inner world to be guarded by design. The mercury readings sharpen that edge. If rivers truly run inside, then the chamber was built not to welcome witnesses, but to deter them. So the center remains a sealed sentence, and we must read the site from its margins, in a way that makes the new commander even more important. He becomes a verb in a sentence we can understand, while the subject remains hidden. If the core's silence is deliberate, can we still rewrite the manual of the army by listening to the parts that do speak? One figure. Museums have already begun editing labels and redesigning layouts. The assumption that bodies followed molds, while heads carried individuality, no longer matches the evidence. The commander's tiered skirt plates, beveled collar, layered belt, and sash placement force a new category for high command bodies that did not exist in previous typologies. That ripples outward. If the clay can encode this much rank language, then many figures that were tagged as generic may require reclassification after a closer look at armor density, belt knots, and stance. Production models change too. The commander's finishing quality suggests a tiered workshop system where high-status commissions climbed a ladder of artisan expertise. You can see it in the sanding, in the angle of the tool strokes, and in the confidence of transitions. That implies a management system capable of distributing tasks by skill and coordinating delivery to hit a political deadline. It reads like state capacity made visible in sculpture. The posture also forces curators to revisit ambiguous hand positions across the pits. Hands that were assumed to grip spears may in some cases be frozen gestures, either signaling or receiving orders. If the army records a doctrine of command, then gesture vocabulary matters as much as weapon type. Exhibitions that used to highlight quantity alone now have a compelling reason to emphasize choreography. This single figure becomes a pivot point for educational narratives, and he does it without drama. He does not shout. He raises his arm by an inch and turns the conversation. If one figure can reset the reading of an entire site, how much reclassification is waiting in unexcavated ground that still hides hundreds of such signals? Workshops, labor, and the human pulse in the clay. Behind the commander's authority, you can feel the hum of workshops. Tool marks differ across surfaces in ways that indicate multiple hands. Edges polished to a finer sheen appear where a senior artisan probably took the final pass. Finger impressions along inner seams suggest moments when a piece was steadied or rotated by someone who knew exactly how much pressure the clay could take before it deformed. These are the small traces that turn a monument back into human work. Pigment residues deepen the picture. Under magnification, you can see flecks of malachite green along armor seams and iron red in the recessed lines of a belt motif. If those colors were part of a rank code, then the army once spoke to the eye across the pits with a language of color as well as form. The loss of that palette to oxidation over the past 50 years has camouflaged an entire system of information that the ancient viewer would have read instantly. Reconstructing that code is not just an exercise in aesthetics. It is a way to recover how information moved in a court that prized order. Labor organization emerges as a quiet epic. The Qin state mobilized quarry workers to mine clay, teams to mix and temper it, specialists to assemble bodies from modular parts, finishers to cut faces, painters to apply mineral colors, and supervisors to maintain consistency while allowing the individuality that makes the army feel alive. The commander sits at the apex of that craft pyramid, and his quality becomes a proxy for how sophisticated that pyramid had to be. In that sense, he is not only a military figure, he is a portrait of a production culture that could scale detail without losing coherence, a feat that modern factories still struggle to achieve without heavy oversight and quality control. If the workshops were this organized, what other ranks or roles have been misread as generic that will flip once we look for belts, collars, and gestures with fresh eyes? What the commander reveals about Qin power. Qin Shi Huang has always been described in superlatives. He unified 7 kingdoms. He standardized currency, axle widths, and script. He forced roads across mountains and sent walls over ridges. He burned books and executed dissent. He stalked immortality and built a mausoleum city underground. Those sentences can flatten a complicated life into a string of extremes, but the commander reintroduces nuance. Power here is not just breadth. It is the ability to encode process so deeply that it survives translation across millennia. The army was never simply a threat made of clay. It was an operating system. The commander is one of its interface screens. He shows how a decision might have been made, how orders were signaled, and where authority sat in the flow between cavalry and archers. He confirms that the emperor's dream was not only about force after death. It was about continuity, about the idea that a method could be preserved in form so perfectly that it would still read as method when the language had changed and the pigments had gone. This is why his discovery matters beyond the thrill of a new statue. It forces us to see the mausoleum as a set of instructions. The pits are not a cemetery of things. They are a library of actions. The commander is a chapter on how power moved, how it was read, and how it was obeyed. That moves the Terracotta army from spectacle to manual. It also intensifies the mystery of the sealed core. If the outer system is this articulate, what is the inner system designed to say that requires silence to preserve it? If a single rank can surface with such clarity after 2,000 years, how many more functions are quietly waiting under the unturned soil? And what will they change in the way we tell China's origin story? Conclusion. The unearthed commander forces a simple admission. The Terracotta army is not a static gallery, but a living system of meaning whose rules we are only beginning to decipher. One figure with unfamiliar armor, a directive stance, and deliberate placement near elite chariots has redrawn the map of Qin military symbolism, suggesting that the mausoleum encoded rank, logistics, and command in clay with a granularity scholars had long doubted. If a single officer can tilt the narrative, then the pits we've explored are not merely representative, they are instructive, designed to transmit a blueprint of power across millennia. That realization reframes the sealed tomb mound at the site's center. The decision to keep it closed has often been cast as conservational caution, and rightly so, but it now reads as a challenge as well. What framework of governance, what ritual choreography, what technical archives might be preserved within a chamber that ancient texts describe as a model of the empire itself? Elevated mercury readings echo the chronicles, implying engineered rivers and lethal defenses. If the outer pits already hold field formations, support units, and now a commander in situ, the inner sanctum may be the keystone. An integrated diagram of authority, cosmology, and afterlife logistics that Qin Shi Huang expected to function beyond death. Future work will depend on tools that can see without touching, higher resolution muon tomography to image voids, multispectral and hyperspectral scanners to trace pigment residues and workshop signatures, AI models trained to detect workshop hands and rank markers across thousands of fragments, and microclimate systems capable of stabilizing polychrome surfaces the instant they meet air. With each advance, how do we balance the hunger to know with the duty to preserve? For now, the commander's arrival is enough to change our posture. The army is no longer a backdrop to a legend, it is an argument about scale, control, and the lengths to which a state will go to choreograph memory. The clay still speaks, and it speaks of organization, intention, and a ruler who built a machine to outlast him. The next fragment lifted from the soil may be small, but its implications may not be. A commander raised his arm and the afterlife army spoke differently. If this discovery just shifted your sense of what the first emperor built and why he built it, add your voice to the dig below. Tell us whether the central mound should remain sealed until conservation can catch up, or whether we are ready to risk opening the room that was designed to outwait us all. Subscribe for the next chapter as more of this underground machine steps into the light, and share this with someone who loves history told by the stones that refuse to stay quiet.